Okay guys, so we are officially going to get into solving quadratics using root method. So throughout this unit, we are going to learn 4 different ways to solve a quadratic. So this is the first of 4. And this will be a 2-part video because we're going to kind of just focus on the idea of root method in this video and then get into some more complicated examples in the next video. So here's our first example. X squared is equal to 144. So in your mind, think of a number that when squared equals 144. So some of you guys are probably coming up with 12. And yes, that is true because 12 squared does equal 144. But you're actually missing another answer completely. Because if you think about it, when we take a negative number and square it, a negative times a negative is also a positive. So technically, there's 2 answers to this, and the other answer is negative 12. Because if we do negative 12 squared, we get 144. So we want to know the algebra behind this. And so the algebra behind this is that we should be using an inverse operation. The opposite of squaring something is taking the square root. So really what we're doing is taking the square root of both sides of this equation, because the square root of anything squared is just itself, x. And now here's a new mathematical symbol that you have not seen before, and that symbol is plus or minus. So we literally say this is called plus or minus. That's how you say that symbol. And so the answer is the square root of 144 is plus or minus 12, because technically there are 2 answers. And so this one symbol says positive 12 and negative 12 are your answers. And so it's very, very important that anytime you take a square root, in an equation, you should use plus or minus. Very important. So for this next one, when we solve, we technically solve going opposite order of operations. So order of operations is PEMDAS. So when we solve, we go backwards. So we really solve SADMAP using inverse operations. So subtraction is what I get rid of first here by adding 40 to both sides, which gives me 3x squared equals 300. Then up next, we get rid of, well, we're getting rid of multiplication using division. So we're going to divide both sides by 3, which gives us 100. And then the last thing we should be getting rid of is the exponent by using the inverse operation, which is a square root. And so my answer here is plus or minus 10. So I have 2 answers. My answer is positive 10, or my answer is negative 10, which we simply write as plus or minus 10. And that makes sense because if we do 3 times 10 squared minus 40, 3 times 10 squared is 100, so 3 times 10 is 300. 300 minus 40 does in fact equal 260. Same thing if we do negative 10. That gives me 300 minus 40, which is 260 again. So both answers work. Okay, so now let's look at this one, because something unique is going to happen when we go to solve this one. So again, we want to get rid of the addition first, because we're going in reverse order of operations. And then we're going to get x squared equals negative 1. So you may remember that taking the square root of negative 1 is a mathematical no-no, because if you think about it, 1 times 1 is positive 1, negative 1 times negative 1 is also positive 1. That's what we just saw, the plus or minus. So here, it's not actually possible to take the square root of -1. So what we would say, our answer in Algebra 1, is that there are no real solutions. This graph, or this equation rather, has no correct answer. In high school, just so you know, what you'll end up saying your answer here is, if you remember this, the square root of a negative is just an imaginary number, the letter I. So you'll actually end up saying that your answer is plus or minus I. But that's just kind of previewing what you're going to see later on. So in general, solutions, if you remember, we kind of mentioned already that a solution on a graph is an x-intercept. So typically, quadratics have two solutions because they cross the x-axis twice. But we've also seen some examples where it touches just once, or where it doesn't cross the graph at all. So it's possible to have two solutions, one solution, or no solution at all. And so if you think about it, two solutions is going to happen anytime you square root a positive number. Negative numbers, when we take the square root of a negative number, that's when we end up getting no real solutions or an imaginary number. So anytime you square root a negative number, you get an imaginary number, so no real solution. And so if you think about it, we've got a situation for positive numbers, we've got a situation for negative numbers. The only one we're missing is 0 because it's not positive or negative. So you're going to have one real solution anytime you square root 0. So if you're taking the square root of 0, it makes sense because you're supposed to put plus or minus anytime, but there is no square root, positive or negative, of 0. So when you take the square root of 0, that's only one answer, and that's 0. So these are the three scenarios that are going to come up when we're taking the square root. And just a little math humor for you. Hey guys, want to meet my new friend? Sure, but where is he? He's right here. Why can't anyone else see you? And then the square root of -1 is saying, beats me. And us clever mathematicians know that's because he's an imaginary friend. Ha 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 ha.